Hi, in this video I'm going to show you a little bit about how to use master bus compression as one of the last stages of your mixing to create some real nice polish and extra dynamic control and essentially power for your mix as a way to really finish it off. So this is the House of the Rising Sun that I've been working with. So what would happen normally is I would have already gone through, I've done a little bit of just static balancing onto this mix and done a little bit of panning, but I haven't done anything in terms of any kind of compression or EQ, haven't done a submix of the drums, haven't done any kind of treatment of the vocal, and no automation yet. All of that should be done before we start going into master bus compression. But it's a good idea to use master bus compression in pretty much any mix setting that you are working on, unless you intend to send this out to a mastering house where they're going to do actual real mastering of your tracks. You don't want to put master bus compression on a track that somebody else is going to go ahead and master for you. You might want to do it for your own use, but then also create a dry mix without the master bus compression to send to the mastering house. But this is a little bit like kind of faking mastering. Everybody's doing it. They've been doing it for a long time. At first, people kind of talked it down, saying it was cheating or kind of a crutch. But really, pretty much now, everybody's doing it, and it really makes the mixes pop. You've been noticing maybe on YouTube this thing called Lander, where people are talking about sending their mixes to this online process that makes them sound even better. This is that kind of an idea. It's really almost post-processing, but you do it right in the session. You don't have to bounce it out and do anything separate. So master bus compression is using a series of compressors and limiters rather than just one, but using a series of them for the various factors that they're able to impart to the mix, and layering them one into the next, and usually then ending with a limiter as the last stage. We use these as inserts on the master bus. So I'm going to start with a multi-band compressor, the multi-maximizer. And what this is essentially 5 compressors in one that are isolated to frequency bands in the frequency spectrum. So by default, nothing is really happening here. But we want to set our threshold down a little bit, just like we would with a regular compressor. And we want to set our output ceiling. I like to use a -1 just to try and keep the gain stage under control. Now you can start to see, with the threshold lower, you can start to see that some of these bands of the compressor are doing something. So this actually might be a good starting point. We might want to go in and add a little bit of gain. Let's just put 1 dB of gain in the upper mids. So for now, let's move on. The last step in my series of dynamic control is going to be a limiter. So I'm going to drop down here to the bottom slot and use the L1. I like to set the release really fast. Set the threshold pretty high, maybe like about a -2, and again the output ceiling somewhere around -1, or maybe you might want to go to -0.5. The limiter is a special kind of compressor. It, instead of just reducing the gain at along a curve, what it does is it sets the output ceiling and says no more. It's not going to get past this. Sometimes people think of a limiter like a brick wall compressor. In other words, it's just, going to go to the peak and it's not going to go any further. It's a good way to control those last remaining overs that might get past one or two of the compressors at the very last point in the chain. It makes sure you don't have any clipping. But it really, of its own, doesn't do anything much in terms of making the sound more powerful or changing the timbre at all. You don't want the limiter to be doing very much at all, just at those points where the peaks sort of slip through. That's when it's going to do its job. So that's why the threshold doesn't need to be very low. So then I'm going to put in one more compressor in this chain, one that I like to use, which is the UAD LA2A Teletronic. Talking old school here. It's to me it sounds very smooth. It's very broadband, really the opposite of the multiband compressor here. And the question always is, do I want this before or after the multiband compressor? So let's dial this in and then move it around and see how it sounds. Okay, because this compressor is, one band across the whole spectrum, and this mix is very bass heavy right now, which I like, but does create some dynamic issues. It's really easy to get the LA2A to pump, which we don't want. We don't want any of these compressors to be set so high that we can actually hear them coming on and off, which is called pumping. That's the beauty of using a series of compressors, is that not only do we take advantage of the different qualities that each of them have, but we also don't have to push any one of them hard enough that we have to worry about this pumping. But collectively they create quite a bit of gain control and resulting in power. So let's take a listen here. I'll move the LA2A up and back in front or behind the multiband compressor. Very different. So let's take a look at the multiband compressor as I move the LA2 in front of it or in back of it. I think one of the reasons why it sounds so much brighter when the LA2A is in front of the multiband is that 1 dB of gain on the high mids is really peeking through when I put that multiband LA2A in front of it. The reason why I put the 1 dB of gain here before was that I felt like we could have had a little more upper mids, but with the LA2A there, this brings out probably too much of the upper mids. But let's check it out. So let me just show you a couple more things about the multiband compressor and then we'll go. So you can move the borders of the bands by clicking and dragging these dividers, you can solo each of the bands so you can hear what's going on in each of those individual compressors. So just soloing and listening to these various bands can be very instructive in terms of thinking about the effect of either enhancing. If you're thinking about EQ, for example, those are the frequencies that you go into when you're talking about frequencies above about 7K. And you can learn a lot about which frequencies you're going for, or the effect of certain frequency bands, by listening to a multi-band compressor in solo mode. For this reason, I tend to like multi-band compression over EQ. That's a topic for another day, but you'll notice I'm not putting any EQ in this chain. Some people do, but I tend to like to do the frequency spectrum work with a multi-band compressor instead of with an EQ. So you can hear that the multi-band compression in combination with other compressors and a limiter on the master bus can make your track really gel together, create a smoothness and a unity of sound that you can't get just by putting processors on the individual tracks. It's a very good move to do. Someplace within about 2/3 of the way through a mix, start putting some master bus compression in, and then you'll go back and start tweaking some things, and it's a balance between what happens on the tracks and what happens in the master bus, to the point where you feel like it's all ready to go. Okay, that's it. Master bus compression's very cool. See ya. Bye.